9 years ago, there was a controversial federal report that was warning of the dangers of right-wing extremism. According to its author, quote, the economic downturn back in 2008, going into 2009, and the election of the first African-American president present unique drivers for right-wing radicalization and recruitment. The report created a bit of a firestorm in Capitol Hill. Janet Napolitano, then head of the DHS, disavowed the report. Well, Daryl Johnston wrote that report as a senior domestic terrorism analyst for the Department of Homeland Security. He now owns DT Analytics. It's a private consulting firm for state and local law enforcement agencies. Mr. Johnston, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Chuck.
So, you've seen today's news. Is there any part of your report that you wrote in 2009 that if law enforcement had it today, that might have prevented this?
Well, I don't know about preventing it, but we did sound the alarm back in 2009 that due to the economic downturn and the unprecedented election of having the first African-American elected, that this would serve as a recruitment boom for these extremist groups on the far right. So we have anti-government groups, we have hate groups like white supremacists, we have people that don't even want to be U.S. citizens. They're called sovereign citizens.
This was, the report at the time was criticized. Some Republicans on Capitol Hill thought it was encroaching on speech, and to the point of saying, well, wait a minute, what's wrong with criticizing the president? That they thought that line. What line did you draw between normal criticism versus extremism? Yeah,
so there was 2 points of criticism. One was the fact that we pointed to returning military veterans coming home to a downturn in the economy, not getting the health care that they deserve, and that they may be susceptible to recruitment by these groups. Not that they would just go out and join these groups arbitrarily, but that they would actually be targets of recruitment because of their military training and their leadership. So that was one controversial point. The other, as you pointed out, was the vague definition that we had buried in a footnote that talked about, people that opposed abortion and illegal immigration and were anti-government in general. Taking that definition out of context, I could see where there was confusion. But within the scope of the document, we were talking about violent extremism, criminality, terrorism. And so that's kind of where the message got lost, is when that mischaracterization occurred.
Is there, for about 4 or 5 years during let's say, as sort of the rise of, as Al-Qaeda got broken up and ISIS formed, and there were all these sort of there was this concern about radicalization of Muslims here in the United States, radicalization of economically challenged Muslims in the Middle East, and that they were very susceptible to the ISIS message or the Al-Qaeda message. It sounds like you were trying to sound the alarm here. Is there radicalization concerns is there a specific group we should be worried about today?
There certainly is. There's a wide variety of groups. When we look at domestic terrorism, we're talking about groups on the far fringes of the right, which are, hate-based groups and anti-government groups. Then we have those on the far fringes of the left, like the anarchists and the Antifa that we have. There's also single-issue movements such as, animal rights extremists and eco-terrorists and anti-abortion extremists. So we have a wide spectrum of groups and movements and individuals that radicalize here in the United States.
What are some of the tools to try to, what are best practices to try to de-escalate, to try to keep more folks from being radicalized, whether it's this gentleman here or the crazy guy that shot Steve Scalise?
Yeah, so the government's been looking at this problem for a number of years. There's been a number of recommendations put forward, but none have really been put into practice. One of them is counter-messaging, going out there and when someone's, embracing a conspiracy theory that's totally untrue, to challenge that and to show, the counterpoints to that and how that belief system isn't, plausible or logical. So that was one thing, but the emphasis of this administration, as well as the previous administration, is to put resources and training faith-based leaders in the Muslim community to try to identify those who may have more radical views and to report those people to the FBI so that they could be monitored. So
is that a program that now we should be considering more than just in Muslim communities and worrying about international terrorism?
Right, and so we come to 2017, and we're starting to realize that we need to have some of these, federal dollars go to organizations to combat the non-Islamic extremists here in the United States. And we actually had one organization called Life After Hate that was supposed to get a federal grant of several $100,000. This organization are actually people who have left the white nationalist movement and realized all of the deception and all of the falsehoods that were in that movement. And so they set up an organization, Life After Hate, hoping to reach out to those disaffected white nationalists who are on the fence or may have vulnerabilities to pull them out of the movement. And the funding was pulled in 2017 by this administration.
This issue of the word nationalist as a buzzword, is that a trigger word with some of these hate groups?
It certainly is. I mean, it's a term that's kind of morphed recently. We used to call these groups white supremacists or white separatists. Now, white nationalism is kind of a term that they use themselves to try to dismiss the hatred and the bigotry that's at the center of these things.
The issue of social media, though, being so pervasive, it seemed to me that all of the programs that I remember looking at and studying and reporting about to try to combat this ISIS propaganda, they didn't work.
Yeah.
They really didn't work. So is social media just something that's just almost impossible to combat when it comes to conspiracy theories? You know, the far end of AM radio was easy to isolate in the 70s and 80s. It's not easy now.
Yeah, certainly the advent of the internet and all the technologies associated has compounded this problem, and it has actually brought the extremist messaging into the privacy of people's homes. So, you know, a couple of decades ago when I was studying these movements, you actually had to go to a KKK rally on someone's property or know somebody within these movements and have face-to-face interaction. Nowadays, people can come across this extremist propaganda and these anti-government conspiracy theories in the comfort of their own home, in the privacy of their own home, and have anonymity.
If you were asked to write this report today, would you change much in it? Anything in this report that you wrote in 2009, would you change it? How much would you change?
I would not change anything. I mean, obviously, we've had several attacks, year after year. So I guess I would have a lot more examples to cite to back up the analysis.
Daryl Johnson, I will leave it there. Thanks for coming in. Appreciate you sharing your expertise on this. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.